So quick, a little bit of review through the rest of the Old Testament that we have done so far. We started off in the beginnings. What happened in the beginning?
God created the earth.
Yep, one thing, God created the earth. What else happened?
The first sin.
First sin happened.
First murder.
First murder happened.
Flood.
The flood happened.
Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel happened. Very good. So then we shift into the patriarchs, named after patriarchs. Anybody know a patriarch?
Abraham.
Abraham,
Isaac.
Isaac,
Jacob.
Jacob,
Joseph.
Joseph. Very good. We're getting this. They don't all die in Egypt. Joseph and his brothers all die in Egypt. And their descendants need to exit Egypt, which is known as the Exodus. Who led them out?
Moses.
Moses, assisted by
Aaron.
Aaron. Very good. They ended up in the wilderness an extra 37 and a half years or so. And Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. Who leads them into the promised land?
Joshua.
Joshua. So they conquer the promised land in a 5-year war, approximately. Everybody settles, but they haven't actually conquered all of the land yet. And we shift into the period of the judges. Who's your favorite judge?
The left-handed
Judge
one.
Judy.
Ehud.
You. Yes.
Edith, you have a favorite judge?
It's a really gruesome story. Not that I can think
Okay. Matthew?
Solomon.
Solomon's not a judge.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Samson.
Samson, Ehud, Micaiah?
I don't know. Joshua, maybe?
He wasn't a judge.
Nah, too many good options.
Okay. Izzy?
I don't know. Samson too. I guess.
Samson 2, okay. You like him better than Samson 1?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
for sure.
Alright.
Oh my
Samson won was
No good.
yeah.
Moving out of the judges, we have a transitional character getting into the monarchy period. He was a quiz question. Who was the
Samuel.
last... Very good. Samuel. Last judge, first prophet. Samuel. And then we have the first king, Saul. That doesn't go so well for Israel. David is the next king. We talked about him like forever ago. Is that like last year or something even?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
So-
it was.
Now today we will finish up the United Monarchy. Next week we'll look at how it divides. We're going to look at Solomon today. And the temple events. So Solomon's reign is recorded in 2 different books. We didn't give her paper, did we? We got you partially decked out. We'll get you rest of the way decked out later. So if you want to look on your timeline and find Solomon's reign, you should find David in front of him or to the left, and his son Rehoboam would be to the right. Sorry the print is as small as it is.
You fall down from 1,000, it's about
Mhm.
almost halfway through the paper.
Yep. So there's 20 chapters of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles that are devoted to Solomon's reign. The 2 accounts are very similar, but they're not quite identical. He reigns for 40 years. His father David also reigned for 40 years. Before him, Saul is oftentimes thought to have reigned for 40 years.
Well, what is with God in year 40?
Number.
The number 40 is a significant number. It's a number of testing.
Is it?
Yes.
40 days.
Now, the most significant thing that takes place in Solomon's reign is he builds the temple. So he starts reigning in 1015. It takes 3 years to get his throne firmly established. That's like most of a presidency, and then they're campaigning to get him out of office. And Solomon's just starting to feel comfortable, like, okay, now we can start a building project. After 3 years. They build it in 7 years, and they dedicate it in the fall of 1004. Anybody know what's significant about 1004 BC?
Not off the top of my head.
3000th year of the world's history.
Oh wow.
The world was created in 4004 BC. Solomon completes and dedicates the temple in 1004 BC.
Okay, that's significant.
Mm-hmm.
Was that intentional because of that, you think?
It's a good question. Is God timing things properly? Do you know what happened 1,000 years later?
They returned and rebuilt the temple again.
About
Whose birthday did we celebrate?
Oh,
Jesus.
Jesus was born in the 4,000th year of the world. Nothing happened that I know of in the 6,000th year. However, Jesus' birth went under the radar for a full generation, so who knows? 1996 was the 6,000th year of the world.
Yeah, I don't know.
And you were
Might have been
alive.
1997. Yes, I was alive.
Wow. I wasn't.
All right. I have a handout on the temple, but I also found a really good YouTube video that'll illustrate this. Hmm?
That's what I found you watching.
Yes. Awesome YouTube video.
Yes.
And one of those back to Micaiah.
Go down from 900 BC
Okay.
and
Yes.
then almost directly down from that. See what's between the dash and line? I wonder who's gonna talk about that. Oh, here's the temple.
That's a lot of gold.
Alright. Maybe I can figure out how to get this thing to play.
The
Yeah, it'd be
bathtub
good.
thingy. I
The
remember reading
bathtub
about
thingy.
that.
Alright.
That was so cool.
Gotta work on the volume level. Otherwise I'm afraid it might blow your ears out. Just really quiet.
Edible, imagine if we played like RO or something
Oh gosh, oh
before
God.
changing the volume.
Okay. That did not work. That did not work.
Press the space bar.
No.
Darn.
Ah. I love that picture.
It is a good picture. You're struggling, Dad.
I am. Technology is not always my friend.
Me either. But I do have to work tomorrow.
And it came to pass in the 480th year, after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, that he began to build the house of the Lord. And the house which King Solomon built for the Lord, the length thereof was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 20 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits. And the porch before the temple of the house, 20 cubits was the length thereof, according to the breadth of the house, and 10 cubits was the breadth thereof before the house. And for the house he made windows of narrow lights. And against the wall of the house he built chambers round about, 5 cubits high, and they rested on the house with timber of cedar. The nethermost chamber was 5 cubits broad, and the middle was 6 cubits broad, and the third was 7 cubits broad. For without in the wall of the house he made narrow rests round about, that the beams should not be fastened in the walls of the house. The door for the middle chamber was in the right side of the house, and they went up with winding stairs into the middle chamber, and out of the middle into the third. And the house, that is, the temple before it, was 40 cubits long. And the oracle in the forepart was 20 cubits in length, and 20 cubits in breadth, and 20 cubits in the height thereof. And within the oracle he made 2 cherubims of olive tree, each 10 cubits high. And he set the cherubims within the inner house, and they stretched forth the wings of the cherubims, so that the wing of the one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their wings touched one another in the midst of the house. And he carved all the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubims and palm trees and open flowers, within and without. And the whole house he overlaid with gold, until he had finished all the house. And for the entering of the oracle he made doors of olive tree. The lintel and side posts were a fifth part of the wall. So also made he for the door of the temple posts of olive tree, a fourth part of the wall. And the two doors were of fir tree. The two leaves of the one door were folding, and the two leaves of the other door were folding. And he carved thereon cherubims and palm trees and open flowers, and covered them with gold fitted upon the carved work. And Solomon made all the vessels that pertained unto the house of the Lord, the altar of gold, and the table of gold, whereupon the showbread was. And the candlesticks of pure gold, 5 on the right side, and 5 on the left, before the oracle, with the flowers and the lamps, and the tongs of gold. And he set up the pillars in the porch of the temple. And he set up the right pillar, and called the name thereof Jachin. And he set up the left pillar, and called the name thereof Boaz. And upon the top of the pillars was lily work. So was the work of the pillars finished. And he made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. It was round all about, and his height was 5 cubits. And a line of 30 cubits did compass it round about. It stood upon 12 oxen, 3 looking toward the north, and 3 looking toward the west, and 3 looking toward the south, and 3 looking toward the east. And the sea was set above upon them, and all their hinder parts were inward. And it was an handbreadth thick, and the brim thereof was wrought like the brim of a cup, with flowers of lilies. It contained 2,000 baths. And he made 10 bases of brass. 4 cubits was the length of one base, and 4 cubits the breadth thereof, and 3 cubits the height of it. And on the borders that were between the ledges were lions, oxen, and cherubims. And every base had 4 brazen wheels, and the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel. Then made he 10 lavers of brass. One laver contained 40 baths, and upon every one of the 10 bases 1 laver. And he put 5 bases on the right side of the house, and 5 on the left side of the house. And he set the sea on the right side of the house eastward, over against the south. So was ended all the work that King Solomon made for the house of the Lord.
So what was the purpose of the sea thing? The massive bath thing?
Water storage, probably to dispense to the smaller labors.
So you wonder if they had a suspension method, or if someone had to climb up the top there and like.
How did they fill it?
Good question. I don't know. I imagine that was one of the manual labor issues. They always had people cutting wood and drawing water for the tabernacle at Shiloh, back when the Gibeonites were consigned to that kind of labor. So,
It was nice to see an actual representation.
yep, the visual representation goes a lot further than reading an architectural description, I found.
Because I could kind of picture a rectangle type
Mhm.
thing, but I didn't really get the whole picture.
Yep. So it's kind of like a supersized version of the tabernacle, and all the layout is pretty much the same. You have the Holy of Holies, you've got the inner holy place, outer courtyard, and everything like that. You've got the same elements. You've got big wash basin and a lot of smaller ones actually, which they didn't have for the tabernacle. You've also got the giant altar.
2 columns. That's a change.
Yep, 2 columns are a change. It's all made out of stone. It's not a tent. Lot of gold.
Lot.
I guarantee you Corinthian capitals got their idea from these. They're the only ones that have that leafy at the top.
Possibly, yeah. The columns are actually are a point of nobody really understands how they work in there. So in the video, they were freestanding, not supporting anything. In the handout I gave you, it actually shows them supporting the portico on the front of the temple, the entry thing. And an architect would do it this way, but it's not described as actually holding anything up. And they're made out of bronze, they're not made out of stone. So could you put stone on top of a bronze pillar that size? Would it support weight? I actually don't know because I'm not a bronze worker. So there's a lot of artistic licenses taken both in this illustration, the video illustration, but the basic framework of what it is and how it could have played out is not too far off of what's described in the scriptures.
That's a big altar outside.
That is a really big altar, and that's one of the nice things is translating cubits into feet is hard, but when you see that with a person next to it, you're like, that
That's
will
massive.
burn a lot of critters fast.
I mean, he did it offer like thousands of animals at once.
And have you ever wondered about the logistics of offering 1,000 sacrifices in a day?
Yeah.
Just wondered.
It's
That really
born
makes-
like the original.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question that's accurate here and in the video,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably know, what is the significance of the gradations between the bottom floor and then they increase, it's go up, you can see the cutaway, they do it here too.
So they have stairs going up into the Holy of Holies? Is that what you're talking about?
No,
No.
that's in the center, I'm talking about
The
the
storage?
outer
Oh,
rooms that were
Yeah, the outer
constructed.
rooms.
You
Mm-hmm.
can see it here where they've got a,
Yep.
and they explain that in the video, I'm sure, I know why they didn't attach the floors with wood, so it could expand and contract, maybe? Because they weren't fastened, the video
Yeah,
said.
they weren't fastened, and I'm not sure if they were trying to maintain the structural integrity of the temple building itself, if that's an architectural thing, but for whatever reason, they didn't fasten them, so if they're not gonna go into the wall, then they have to set on something, so then they just built 3 walls vertically for them to sit on. So that's why you can get 5 cubits wide and 6 and then 7, because each one of those is a cubit wide. So,
And you saw in the video too, where they had the golden tables and the stuff that
mm-hmm.
they all had, carrying staffs on them, because you weren't supposed to touch them, right?
Yep.
I thought that was only for the Ark of the Covenant, but I think
No.
anything in,
The altar of incense and the tables, yep, they all had to be carried by poles.
good stuff.
So remember, David stored up all the materials necessary for building the temple and had all the plans laid out for him. So everything we just saw, all the plans, were actually drawn up by David, Solomon's father. Solomon, all he had to do is feel comfortable enough with his rule to say, let's start. The land had been purchased, everything was ready to go. They had stone, they had gold, they had timbers, they had arrangements. Solomon just said, go.
Like you said with David, he did everything up to actually build it.
Yep.
Why did he wait till the 4th year of his reign then?
We're not sure how young he was when he started reigning. He may have been in his teens, honestly. He may have just hit his early 20s, so he may not have been confident. He had to dispense with a few people that were left over from his father's reign, and it was specifically says that after he dealt with all of those guys, then his throne was firmly established, and then he started building the temple.
Don't mean to be the problem, student, but this is my last question about this. They have all the materials right now, from what I understand, to build the new temple.
Mm-hmm.
But in this image, is this the court of the Gentiles? Or is that farther out here?
I think that is a part of Herod's temple. That's going to be a later temple. Solomon's temple gets destroyed. They rebuild another one. It's really small compared to Solomon's. Herod rebuilds that temple in Jesus' time frame. Makes it much bigger, much grander.
Which is standing to the-
That has a court of Gentiles, I believe.
Is that one still standing?
Yeah, Herod's is still there.
How good quality is it?
It's decent, they added something to the top, but I don't want to stray off pastures.
That one got torn down stone from stone.
Well, I just saw a picture of it from John Haller, and he just was there. Maybe I've got the wrong.
It might be the Wailing
year.
Wall.
I'll have to.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyhow.
All right.
So Solomon, besides being known for building the temple, he's known for his wisdom. He asked for wisdom at the beginning of his reign. He doesn't ask for wealth, long life, or the destruction of his enemies. God gives him those three in addition to wisdom, because he was so wise at the beginning of his reign that he asked for wisdom. So then his wisdom is illustrated by the two mothers who had one live baby and one dead baby, and they both said the live baby was theirs, and they both said the dead baby was the other one. He cut to the heart of the issue, quite literally, by asking for his sword. And he knew that the true mother would not want her son to die. So the true mother was revealed. So then it says people came from all over the world, that would be the known world presumably, to listen to Solomon's wisdom, including the Queen of Sheba, which is like from forever away. It's like somebody visiting from Siberia or Timbuktu.
I actually know what that is.
Mm-hmm. Its place. Yep. So Solomon also has quite a few writings that are preserved in the Old Testament. He wrote the book of Proverbs, a large portion of it, I should say. Not quite all of it. He wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and he wrote the Song of Songs, otherwise known as the Song of Solomon. There are also two psalms that are accredited to him, Psalm 72 and Psalm 127. That won't be on a Kahoot someday.
It won't be?
Won't. Not
So
going
it's
to ask
weird.
you, yeah, which two psalms, or which psalm did Solomon write? 72, 27, 126, or 138? In the scriptures, it actually says that he wrote 3,000 proverbs. Only about 10% of those are preserved in the book of Proverbs. So there's a lot of his wisdom that did not get preserved.
So those
That
like
is unfortunate.
greatest hits, or do you think he was just lost the time?
I don't know. That's what the Holy Spirit preserved for us. And if only those two psalms are his, those were his two greatest hits out of 1,005 songs that were credited to him as well. That many songs, I suspect he reused and recycled a few tunes and just came up with new lyrics or something. But that is a lot of songwriting.
Same chord progressions, probably. Right?
Probably. So Solomon lives in a time of peace. He doesn't have wars that he has to fight constantly like his father David or Saul before him. So he goes on a construction binge. Spends 7 years building the temple. Right next to it, he then spends 13 years building the palace of the forest of Lebanon. And they call it the palace of the forest of Lebanon because there were so many columns in it, it looked like it was a forest inside his palace.
I wish I could have been there.
Yes. Then he also built a palace for Pharaoh's daughter because she wasn't supposed to live in his palace apparently. I don't know the rationale in that one.
Some cultural thing maybe.
Perhaps built up a whole bunch of supporting terraces in Jerusalem. Built a wall around Jerusalem. I think they had to just mostly extend the wall of Jerusalem. Doesn't stop in Jerusalem. He rebuilds the wall of Hazor, which is in northern Israel. I think it's actually on one of the maps. He builds a wall around Megiddo, which is in the middle. It's actually by Armageddon. He rebuilds the city of Gezer, puts a wall around it. He builds up store cities and towns. Those as a logistical base for a chariot-based army. He builds up Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, and Tadmor in the south. Lots and lots of construction going on.
Lots of taxes to pay for it, right?
Yes, a lot of taxes to pay for all this construction because David stored up all the materials out of his conquests. Solomon had to extract it from the population.
Or he just acquired it as gifts. And didn't he also have a trading fleet?
Yes.
That would
So that would be the next thing. Solomon also engaged in trading. Built a fleet of trading ships at Ezion Geber, which is at the north fork of the Red Sea. He would send that fleet to Ophir, and they would get gold from there. Not sure what he sent down there to acquire the gold with. They also did a lot of importing and exporting. So he was importing horses and chariots from Egypt and another kingdom known as Q, the identity of which is not actually known, but it's suspected that it's in the neighborhood of Cilicia, where Saul of Tarsus came from, that neighborhood. But then he would export at least some of those horses and chariots, some he kept for himself, to the Aramean and the Hittite kings. There was a big market for horses and chariots in his day. So he presumably gained a fair amount of wealth from this. Actually, there was an awful lot of inflation that happened in Solomon's day. Catch it in the scripture. It says that he made silver so common it was like gravel on the streets.
Oh my.
So if you can imagine nuggets of silver being something you just walk on and doesn't do anything, like that's serious inflation.
That's a lot of silver.
Imagine,
That is a
like, save
lot
up
of
your
silver.
entire life. You have your entire life savings in silver, and then Solomon becomes king and he kills nothing.
Yes.
I always took that to mean that they were really rich.
It's the time to buy.
Yeah, well, it means that silver was not worth much. So one of the questions, and it doesn't answer it in that verse, is that you can have a lot of silver, it's all over the place, but it won't get you a whole lot. Like, because silver to food ratio or rate is the big question. So they had a lot of silver to work with, which is usually a good thing. Yes, they were wealthy in silver.
Clearly an ancestor of Biden.
No. All right. So he had a downfall. He had a lot of everything, including wives and concubines. Part of the reason he had this many wives and concubines is that there were a lot of kingdoms in his day and age, and everybody wanted to make a treaty with him, and customs were, I give you my daughter in marriage, and then you don't attack us, and we won't attack you. And so there was a lot of diplomacy going on, as this is evidence of. He also had 12,000 horses, which was a lot for an Israelite king. But these are the two things that the law of Moses specified a king was not supposed to have a lot of. And yes,
What did he have against horses? Like the wives and concubines make sense. But what did God have against horses?
Maybe.
yeah, God wanted the Israelites to rely on infantry and not the strength of horses, so that they would, some people would say so they're more dependent on him, but I guess if you're an infantry-based army, you don't have to feed horses. You're also not going to go out on a whole lot of conquest because you don't move as far as fast. And then everybody is trained in infantry tactics instead of relying on cavalry. So kings were not supposed to have a lot of horses. And there's a lot of prophets that prophesy, don't put your strength in horses or put your trust in horses. So Solomon's wives tend to lead him astray. This is probably in the latter half of his reign, we'll say in the last 20 years-ish. So he begins worshiping the false gods of all the nations around him, and he sets up altars to them as well, not just the one that he built in Jerusalem. So it's kind of ironic because before he built the temple in Jerusalem, there were high places in various places around Israel, and he was trying to consolidate worship in Israel down to one spot, as was specified in the law of Moses. And then he reverses course in the latter part of his reign and spreads them all out.
All the usual suspects, Baal, Ashtar.
Yep, all the usual foreign gods. Molech and god of the Moabites. I don't remember what his name was. So next week, we'll segue into that.
Horus.
What?
Horus.
That's an Egyptian god.
Head of a frog.
Okay.
I think so. One of them had the head of a frog on a human body.
They were just weird, is what
Yeah.
they were.
Not good.
So we're gonna look at structures of Hebrew poetry. So in English, we tend to rhyme words. So Matt the fat cat chased a rat, and we think it's poetry.
Just get cringy though.
Exactly. The Hebrews, they had a completely different idea of what poetry should be like.
Theirs is probably much smarter and makes a lot more sense than ours.
Perhaps. What they would like to do is get ideas to rhyme with each other. So they would create parallel ideas. Two basic types of parallelism that comes across in Hebrew poetry. Synonymous and antithetical. Synonymous is like synonym. What's a synonym?
Same.
Yep, two words mean the same thing. Antithetical,
Opposite.
opposites, like antonyms. So the handout I gave you illustrates a few of these. The first one there, the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. And then the second part, the world and those who dwell therein. So the earth and the world are parallel to each other. All that is in it, those who dwell therein. And then the very next verse says, for it was he who founded it upon the sea and planted it firm upon the waters beneath. These will both be synonymous parallelism, where you say the same thing two different ways. And they just love doing this.
Yes, they do.
They do it over and over and over again. And we'll see this is something they do all the time. Let's see. I think there's an example of
Those are called synonymous.
synonymous. Yes. All right. So here's a couple examples. Oh, we just did those two. Antithetical. I didn't like their example for antithetical parallelism. So
How about,
what?
how about Psalms 1:6, the Lord protects the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked the Lord dooms. It's the one on the bottom of the,
Yep, that's a different format, and we'll do that next week.
okay, never mind.
So hang on to that.
Antithetical.
Antithetical parallelism. Two examples on the board or on the screen. Proverbs 10:12. Hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. So you have hatred and love that are opposite of each other's. And hatred stirs up, but love covers. So we're doing the opposite. Psalm 37:9. Evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. So two different types of people that are opposite and parallel to each other. Evildoers, set opposite of those who wait for the Lord. Evildoers get cut off, those who wait shall inherit the land.
Esther, would you also say some of these, that they're axiomatic to modern terms? In other words, if A happens, B happens.
That's a different form of Hebrew poetry, actually. I'm not getting into that one. But
But it looks that way if you
it
look
does.
at the first example up there.
Yep. Yeah, it's an either or. You can use hatred, it'll stir up things. You can use love, and it will cover over offenses. Alright, so this is going to be a group quiz. Synonymous or antithetical? This is the memory verse.
That is synonymous.
Synonymous?
Yes.
Everybody agrees.
Synonymous.
Very good. So now you understand why it says the same thing twice, and we memorize it. Because they wanted it to do that. Alright, what about this one?
Synonymous.
That's synonymous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Healing and refreshment, flesh and your bones.
Mm-hmm.
Very synonymous. It was funny, I was reading a Time magazine article when I was about your age, and they were talking about whoever wrote the Bible, whether it was God or someone else, felt like they had to repeat themselves over and over again. And when I learned about this, I was just like, no, they just don't understand good literature.
Yeah.
This is what they were trying to do. It was very intentional.
Synonymous.
Yeah.
Synonymous.
Yeah.
Doesn't contradict itself. It's
Nope.
not exactly the
Yeah.
same.
A good name and favor are synonymous with each other. Great riches, silver and gold. Something to be chosen, it's better. It's actually three-way synonymous there. Proverbs 3:5.
Antithetical.
Yeah.
Yep, these are antithetical. These ones are opposite ideas.
No, it's antithetical.
Antithetical. This
That's
is
synonymous.
Synonymous, but
Wow.
we know who the victor is. Is it synonymous? Yes.
It could be antithetical, because he and you.
he and you,
Yeah, it's
Head
head and
definitely
heel.
synonymous.
Yep. So the bruising is synonymous, but on either side of it is the verb is the same, but you've got two different subjects and two different objects of that action.
And two different results.
Yep.
Yes.
Jesus will bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
The proto-evangel. That
It's
is.
antithetical parallelism, spoken by God himself.
Do you think that you shall bruise his heels where they got the Achilles heel thing and where that started up from? Do you think there's a relation between those two?
Nope. That's from Achilles taking an arrow through
Well,
his.
I
Yeah.
don't know, but like, do you think there's any?
Nope.
Okay.
All right. I think there's three here.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
I cannot read this without thinking of that book.
I know.
Yeah, the book made.
Or you want us to divide the phrases?
Yeah. So parse this out.
Okay, so Ada and Zillah hear my voice. Your wives of Lamech listen to what I say.
Okay, so that's.
That's synonymous.
Those two are synonymous. Yep. Next two.
I have killed a man for
Synonymous.
wounding me, a young man for striking me.
That's synonymous.
Yep.
If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold.
That would
Antithetical.
Antithetical?
Because, well, there's
Well,
synonymous in the sense where they're
That's an
similar.
if then.
It's synonymous because they're both getting revenge,
Yeah.
Well,
right?
There's a multiplication to it. There's might be able to be classified as a subtype of another type, but it's generally a synonymous idea. Cain gets revenge, Lamech gets revenge, and it's multiplied revenge. It's not just even for even.
Right.
Now, did anybody get the vengeance taken out on them for either of them?
I don't know that anybody murdered Cain or Lamech. So the God said to Cain that if anyone kills you, I will avenge him 7 times over. And so that was kind of a huge discouragement to anybody trying to take vengeance out on Cain for killing Abel. So Cain got a free pass for the rest of his life. No one kills him. And Lamech was claiming the same free pass.
did God actually grant it to him, or did he just say, "Oh, I have this"? Like, I've kind of wondered that. Like, was this like a granted thing?
I've always thought that this, you could call it a delayed wrath. God was not going to allow mankind to judge one another for violence and murder in the pre-flood world. That was a change we see in the post-flood.
Right.
And so, as far as how it actually worked out, we don't get any examples of justice being meted out in the pre-flood world. We just know that 2 people claimed that protection against revenge.
I think it,
And that would seem to lend credence to the reason why the earth was filled with violence, because you could get away with murder and live for 900 years.
it's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that he killed a young man for wounding him, which is like he was trying to execute justice, or at least it seems like that's what he was trying to do.
Yep.
And then he's trying to prevent himself from facing justice. Whatever form of
Yep.
yeah.
It is ironic. Job 38:7.
What is a
Synonymous.
question?
It is a question.
That's
Are we learning about something or are we discerning whether it's synonymous?
That's like-
Synonymous or antithetical?
I'm saying
Synonymous.
synonymous.
well, but that's
I don't feel like there's two things being said here.
no. This is
But-
like the second half of a phrase. Like the whole subject is missing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Izzy, would you like to look up Job 38, verse 6? We'll supply them with context.
I still think it's synonymous. Context not required.
I love the confidence. Very good, Makai.
Well,
Did it come off as prideful?
What was it again, Joe?
38, verse 6.
like
And if you so judge, you can read verse 5 as well.
Do you already know these verses?
Okay. 5. When you determine its measurements, or surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it. And then 6. On what were its bases sunk, and or who laid its cornerstone.
So God is questioning Job about the creation of the earth.
I think,
I mean
okay,
it's not
the only entity that could make the stones cry out or morning stars sing is God. And then the sons of God shouted for joy denotes humans. So you have God's creation singing his praises, and we're his creation. Synonymous!
What were the sons of God marrying the beautiful woman of the earth? in the
Yeah.
creation world? 'Cause wasn't that
There's three options. I don't want to bring that verse into this discussion, please.
so?
I just don't see how it could contradict itself there. Like,
no, it's
it's not the same, but it's not against.
Sang together, shouted for joy, seems similar enough. Sons of God, morning stars seems to be related to the angels or whatever heavenly beings, so I would say definitely synonymous.
It's God
I
creation.
don't know the answer now.
It is a little bit interesting
Help us,
that burning
Pastor.
fireballs are considered as singing, but the people who actually can sing are called shouting.
Right? So this is an example of how you can use synonymous parallelism to start interpreting some Hebrew idioms and figure out what do they actually mean here. So the morning star is the planet Venus, which is also sometimes the evening star. Mercury would be the other one because sometimes also can be seen in the morning or the evening. It's actually an idiom, though, that is used to refer to angelic beings from time to time. This is one of those passages that points that out because we know from other passages that the sons of God refer to angelic beings.
So I was
Okay.
right?
You were right, Micaiah.
Yes!
Totally took this out. And so from this passage, we can see that a poetical reference to morning stars is not always referring to Venus and Mercury. It sometimes is also referring to angelic beings. It's a Hebrew idiom.
And not Hollywood.
It's not a Hollywood thing. I think Satan in Isaiah is referred to as a morning star in another place.
Huh.
So every now and again, this parallelism can actually help us figure out what the Hebrew is actually saying, because occasionally you'll have something like the morning stars, like what does that mean? But it's the next phrase that makes it more clear, because we understand what the sons of God are at the creation. This is as the foundations of the earth are being built. People are not around yet, but as angelic creations were. Now this is a more obscure example of this.
So when do you,
Yeah.
when do you think God created the angelic beings?
In the beginning,
Okay, in the
first 6 days roughly.
What was it before that?
This would imply that they were there at day one when the earth was created.
I suppose
Yeah.
you just said the heavens and the earth. And so in creating the heavens, he presumably created everything in the heavens.
He didn't put stars in the heavens at that time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways you can render created the heavens and the earth.
I think of
I
like
suppose.
nothingness, and then like, oh, there's something there now.
Mhm.
It's just still kind of nothing, but
Yep.
it's, yeah, but it's something.
Yep. All right, so we understand parallelism a little bit. It'll stand out all over the Bible now for you. As you're reading it, as you're memorizing it, you can be like, I know what this is, and I know why they did it this way. That was the last one. Any questions to wrap up this evening?
No, I don't think.
Good to have you back, Pat.
It's good to be back. All right, so hang on to that handout. Micaiah pointed out the bottom one, a chiasmus. We'll look at that because it is another Hebrew poetry. Yeah, that crisscross is an awful diagram. There's a much better way of doing this. We'll talk about that next week.